during this time, many of us have got the impact of stress that's happening in various aspects of our lives, and we don't even realize what's happening. So welcome, Charlotte. Welcome back, and thank you for being here. So my first question really is, what do you mean when you talk about stress?
So the word stress comes from the Latin word distress. And I think that is the type of stress that we are all used to thinking about. But there are actually two different types of stress. There is distress, and there's also something called eustress, which actually is a more positive type of stress. So I think it's really important to differentiate between the two, because eustress is really actually what we need as part of life. I used to row for university, so I like to think about eustress in terms of a rowing race. And eustress is something that actually motivates us. It gets us going. It's seen in a more positive light because it's something that we see within our kind of realm of capability, something that we can manage. And one of the other characteristics of it is that it's generally short term. And so if I think of myself at the beginning of a rowing race, I'm ready to go, the gun goes off, I'm fit enough, I'm strong enough to manage however long that race may be. And I know that once I cross the finish line, the stress will be over. And so I can feel motivated by it, I can feel excited about things. And also what one of the characteristics of eustress is that it actually helps us to perform. However, on the other side of it is distress. And I think that is the stress that we always think about when we think about stress. And the characteristics of that are, it can be either short or long term. And generally it is seen as a negative thing because it is outside of our coping capacity, our ability to manage it. And generally distress has an impact on our ability to perform. One of the important graphs, I think, when it comes to stress is there's something called the stress curve, and the x-axis is performance and the y-axis is stress. And without any stress, we don't perform. If we don't have any stress on our lives, we're kind of laid back, we're inactive. And as we move up that stress, the amount of stress or the length of time that stress is put on us, we move perhaps into more of a eustress space, and our performance actually increases. So if you get a promotion, you move into a job that you're excited about, you can manage the stress there. But if the stress then starts to become too much or goes on for too long, we move past a point of fatigue and down into exhaustion and eventually into burnout in terms of our performance. And so for me, I suppose when I'm thinking about the impact of stress on our bodies, I'm starting to look at too much stress or stress for too long a period of time and the impact that that can have on our bodies as we go into an exhaustion and burnout phase. And also important to note that there are two different types of stress in terms of external stress. So environmental stress, social stress, physiological stress, you know, the stress of COVID, the stress of relationships, not seeing people, the stress of traffic. And then there's also internal stress, which is our fears, our thoughts, negative thinking about things, worrying. So there's an internal element of stress as well. And so both of those can have different impacts on our bodies as well. So for me, stress is either, is it distress or eustress, and is it internal or external?
It's quite incredible what you say. I mean, the knock-on effect in terms of stress, the long-term stress, the short-term stress, the internal stress, the external stress, and how they all, it's not like it's not one or the other. It's not black or white. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the current circumstance that we're in, it has a knock-on effect in various areas of our lives. And what I've noticed and I'm more mindful about is people, you know, just sharing that adrenal fatigue and burnout is really real because of that, what you're saying, that prolonged stress that is just happening, and it's coming in from all sides. what happens to us when we experience stress? This stress that you're talking about, the prolonged stress, be it internal or external, what is it doing to us?
So physiologically, I mean, if you think about our body's response to stress, it's an incredible, our bodies are just this amazing machine that actually stress is, as I say, a bit of stress is a good thing. And if you think about in the caveman days, you came across a lion in your path. Yes. Well, if you didn't get stressed, you get eaten. So the stress is what causes then the release of the hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, to make our bodies ready for fight or flight. So physiologically, what happens is that our heart starts beating faster. So we all know that feeling of increased heart rate. Our blood pressure increases. Blood is moved from unnecessary places like our digestive system to our extremities. So often you'll find that if you feel stressed or anxious about something, you feel sick. And that's because our digestion has actually stopped working and all the blood has gone to our extremities. And our liver is suddenly pumping glycogen into glucose to create enough energy for us to fight or flight. So that's great in the short term. Physiologically, in the long term, the impact of that is actually hugely negative. So if your body is, your liver, for instance, is producing so much glucose, what does that do to then the production of insulin as a result from your pancreas? And how does that then lead into diabetes? If your heart is pumping at such a rate, what is the impact of stress then on that muscle, that heart muscle? If your blood pressure is rising, what is the impact then on hypertension? And so physiologically, the long-term impact of stress on our bodies is huge. Also, what happens in our brains is that the part of our brain that is in control of our emotions, the amygdala, actually hijacks the executive functioning of our brain. So when we're stressed, the logical, rational part of our brains is not in action anymore. And the emotional part of our brains is saying, right, I am now taking control of this bus. And so we lose cognitive function, really. Our ability to make decisions is not as clear as it is when we're in a more relaxed state. And the emotional and mental long-term effects of that are also huge. Anxiety, depression. Our social well-being is impacted because we end up shouting at people around us or reacting in a way that we wouldn't necessarily before. So for me, the impact is both psychological and physiological on our bodies.
I find it quite amazing because we're not necessarily mindful of when there is a stressor that's in front of us and how we are reacting. So when you say, we shouting or elevating our voice, or we going through this prolonged fight or flight, we're going through that for a really long time. And I think it's far beyond what our bodies are designed to do. And that's where the burnout certainly comes in. I think there are many things that people go to in terms of coping mechanisms when they're going through stressful times. It might be unhealthy behaviors. It might be, reaching to a medication to try and calm or reduce the stress, popping pills. We know those are short-term stopgaps and are not good solutions for it. In terms of nutrition and well-being, what do you suggest replaces those things? So how would one help their stressful lifestyles, and what could they do or take to support that?
So, like in everything else in life, we are all different. And I think for me, it's so important that we recognize that we will have different stresses. We all have different levels of anxiety, and our different things that worry us. So our internal stresses specifically are different. So the first step, I think, is to be aware of what are the things that stress me out negatively. What are the things that make me feel uncomfortable or make me feel anxious or make me shout or elevate my voice? And as soon as we start to become aware of those, then we have much more control around how we respond. So, you know, you talk about nutrition. I often see people saying, well, I when I'm stressed out, I eat X, Y, and Z because I just need to. So also remembering that when we're stressed out, our body needs sugar. So our body is saying, I'm feeling stressed, I'm craving a donut. And actually that's going to impact our bodies just as badly as all of the hormones and the things that are happening inside us. Now we're eating the wrong things, we're fueling our bodies with the wrong things. And after we've had that rush of sugar that's helping us to escape the lion that's not actually there, but is a long-term prolonged lion, we have a sugar low, and then we want to eat another donut, or we want to eat something else that's not the right thing for us, and we're feeling ghastly, or we just want to get into bed. And then the cycle becomes this negative cycle of, actually, now I'm feeling awful about myself because I ate the donut, and now I'm feeling more stressed out about myself that I've eaten the wrong thing. And so being aware of what are our reactions normally. Yeah. So if I'm feeling stressed, do I go for the donut, or do I go for the bagel, or whatever the things are that I go for? And what are the other choices that I have? Can I go and either do some mindfulness to bring my executive functioning part of my brain back into play so that I can choose to eat the right things, or I can choose to move my body in the right way? And when we can bring ourselves back into a normal functioning pattern so that the lion isn't staring at us in the face, we actually then have choices. Well, I don't need to fight or flight. I can, you know, slowly walk away, or I can choose to do something else, something that I really enjoy. I can go and eat a delicious salad, and that'll calm me down because it's healthy, it's good for me. Or I can go and move my body. I can go for a walk around the block. I can choose to respond in a different way.
I love what you've said about the lion being, most of us don't realize what our lions are. So to start, I mean, if we just write down our list of lions, that would be a great first step, I think. And then also, what is our individual response to the lion? So if it is something that's stressing us out, how do we normally respond? And then also just to consider, like you've shared, what is the alternative response that I could take? Almost like creating, you know, a list of 3 columns. You've got your lion, your current response, and then maybe replacing it with a better habit or a better response that would reduce the impact of that perceived lion, be it real or not, on our bodies holistically. And just, you've mentioned about stress physically showing up in our bodies, and we've touched on it lightly. So how do we generally see stress showing up in our bodies? Some people maybe don't realize that it's a stress response. So something's happening in their bodies. What could they look out for that would be the flags that they might need to stop and think, hey, this is actually a stress response that's happening in my body. I need to change.
Yeah, so physiologically, I think, as you say, we've kind of touched on that. You know, people know the response. Oh, I've got sweaty palms, or my heart rate is really high. I'm feeling lightheaded. Nausea is often a huge one. As I say, because the blood's being pulled from our digestive system, we start to feel sick. Lightheaded, because again, there's also blood that's being pulled from our brains into our bodies to be used to fight or flight. So there's that physiological, oh, I recognize that something's happening here. Also recognizing that the response to excitement and the response to stress are similar physiologically. So am I feeling excited by something, or am I feeling stressed out by it? Generally, if we're feeling stress, cognitively we will be struggling too. So we will be really having difficulty concentrating. We might have poor judgment. Our decision making might be all over the place, and probably more anxious thoughts than if we were feeling excited about something. So the thoughts around stress are more negative. I don't know if it's frozen. Are you there? It looked like it had frozen for a little bit.
I'm
that
here.
Might have to be cut out. And then emotionally, are you in a different mood? You know, are you more irritable? Are you, I mean, I certainly know when I'm stressed in a negative way, my reaction to my children or my husband or the people around me is definitely different to how I would ordinarily choose it to be. So we're irritable, we're much more easily triggered. Also, we might feel more isolated. We might feel lonely because we're inside our own kind of thoughts and ideas around what's happening, and nobody else seems to necessarily be responding in the same way. So if you're feeling isolated or alone, or if you're feeling a bit more depressed or lower than you normally do, or much more irritable, then that is probably a sure sign. And if you're struggling to think, to concentrate, to make decisions, then that also is a good sign that there's something out there that's stressing you out.
Wow. It's a lot of food for thought. And I think it's amazing that we maybe don't consider the impact that stress in all its forms have on our body. And it really is good for us to check in. In terms of the programs that you run, the individual and the group programs, how do you incorporate stress into those programs? Or stress management?
My programs, the very first step of anything that I do is to try and help people just to gain that awareness of what is my lion, what is happening for me here. So with individual coaching, I spend time helping people to look at, why do I respond to certain things, and what are the things that trigger me. And when we are aware of that and we can start to recognize, that's showing up, there's my lion, oh look, I'm looking it in the face again, then we can start to look at, as you say, what are the things that I do now, and how would I like to respond?
Yes.
How can I choose to respond differently, so that the impact then on our health is either not so long-term, or even in an acute situation is not so big. And the impact on the way that we then respond to the other parts of our lives is not so big. So getting that awareness and then choosing a new way to feel and think and respond, and then just taking the time to help people to implement that, and then accept that there are things in your life that you can't and will not ever have any control of. So how can you let go of those things? So on an individual basis, whether that's in private coaching or within the corporate setting, how can we help people? I know, for instance, that one of the big stresses in the corporate setting or in the work setting is a lack of boundaries. Since we've been working from home so much more, people are expected to be online all the time. They can't have boundaries with their children and the workplace. We're in this kind of funny, I don't go to work, I do my work here, and my boss expects me, or I think that my boss expects me to be online at 6 o'clock when I should be bathing the children, or whatever the case may be. And how can we help people to develop boundaries in the workplace, especially, and in personal life? Because often stress is when our boundaries are overstepped. And why is it difficult for me to set boundaries? How can I do it better for myself, for my own health and well-being? And then helping people to implement that. And just to create awareness in the corporate setting, what is it that is stressing people out? What is it, if we're looking at well-being within the workplace and the value of well-being in the workplace, helping people have the space to talk about what's happening for them, and to take away the stigma of stress, of not managing, of not being capable. Oh, if I'm mentally struggling, or if I'm emotionally struggling, I'm not good at my job. Well, we're all human, so that's not actually true. So how do we in the workplace create a space where people can work through that so that they can perform at their best? And that's good for the workplace and the organization as much as it is for the individual.
I think conversations around mental health are definitely being spoken about far more now than in the past. And stress management is a topic that is being introduced more and more. And I think the times that we're in have probably accelerated that. But, being where we are, nobody really knows how to navigate this journey on their own. And times are stressful. So we haven't all got it figured out. And most of us don't have anything figured out. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that stress is part of our lives, and how we manage that and how we learn to manage that is an important factor in our overall health and well-being. So thank you so much for the chat today, and to discuss the topic of stress. It's a topic that we all share and experience, and really lovely to share it with others. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.